Good evening, dear generals, and welcome once again to our series, Men Around the Führer. Tonight's tale is about a soldier whose fate was inextricably bound to the rise and ruin of the Third Reich, a man born of duty but broken by absolute loyalty, a man whom history remembers by the scornful whisper, Lakeitel, the loyal Lackey. The man we speak of is Wilhelm Johann Gustav Keitel, born in the year 1882 in the village of Helmscherode, nestled in the Duchy of Brunswick. He sprang not from the high Prussian nobility, the famed Junkers, but from a middle-class family of landowners where virtue and obedience were held sacred. Though his heart yearned to be a farmer tending the Helmscherode estate, his father chose to continue managing the land himself, leading young Wilhelm toward the military life. Thus, fate decreed that Keitel would embark on a military career in 1901, joining a field artillery regiment. He was, by all accounts, a good and conscientious soldier, a solidly built, square-jawed Prussian type, nearly 6 feet 1 inch tall. His early military life was conventional. He was promoted to lieutenant a year after entering service, and by 1908 he served as a regimental adjutant. In 1909, he married Lisa Fontaine, the ambitious and strong-willed daughter of a well-to-do estate owner. The marriage was enduring, producing 3 sons and 3 daughters. The First Great European War found him on the Western Front, where he was severely wounded by shrapnel in his lower left arm in September 1914. Following his recovery, he received a posting to the General Staff in 1914, an elite echelon in the German army, a promotion that brought little solace to Keitel, who himself felt keenly aware of his own intellectual limits. Yet duty pulled him forward. By 1918, he was serving in the Naval Corps in Flanders, witnessing the war's end and sharing the widespread shock and disbelief at the collapse of the German Empire. He embraced the infamous stab-in-the-back legend, writing to his wife that they were still young enough to restore what had been destroyed by boundless stupidity. Keitel remained in the heavily reduced Reichswehr after the war. He became heavily involved in the secret reorganization and enlargement of the army, a blatant violation of the Treaty of Versailles. This dedication brought him promotions, reaching major in 1923, and by 1929 he was head of the Army Organization Department in the Reichswehr Ministry, a post he held until 1933. During this clandestine rearmament, he even traveled to the Soviet Union to inspect secret Reichswehr training camps, an experience that left him impressed by the communist country's organization. When the Nazis seized power in January 1933, Keitel was recuperating from a heart attack and double pneumonia. Yet Keitel, like many German citizens and officers, openly and honestly welcomed the notion that the government was headed by a man determined to free Germany from the prevailing miserable circumstances. He later confessed that his personal convictions leaned toward National Socialism. His career accelerated further in 1935, when, on the recommendation of General Werner von Fritsch, Keitel was promoted to Major General and appointed Chief of the Armed Forces Office, Wehrmachtsamt, within the Reich Ministry of War. Here he became the right-hand man of War Minister Field Marshal Werner von Blomberg, attempting to create a centralized command organ to coordinate the Army, Navy, and Air Force. An initiative met with opposition from the generals who wished to protect the Army's privileged position. Then came the crisis of early 1938, a pivotal moment in Keitel's history. Keitel himself was innocently involved in the downfall of his superior, von Blomberg. On January 21st, 1938, Keitel received evidence that von Blomberg's new wife was a former prostitute, information which Keitel forwarded to Hermann Göring, who used it to force Blomberg's resignation. Hitler seized this opportunity to assume supreme command of the armed forces himself. He abolished the War Ministry and established the Supreme Command of the Armed Forces, the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, OKW Keitel, who had previously only met Hitler 3 times and was even unknown to him at one point, was astonished to be appointed Chief of the OKW on February 4, 1938. His superior von Blomberg had recommended Keitel, reportedly telling Hitler, "Keitel is just the man who runs my office," a description Hitler accepted instantly. "That's exactly the man I'm looking for." Keitel's new position carried the rank equivalent to a Reichsminister, yet crucially, he was granted no actual command authority over the 3 Wehrmacht branches, Army, Navy, and Air Force. He was merely the chief of Hitler's personal military staff. He was, in essence, the military chief of staff of the Führer. His role was to serve as Hitler's conduit, drafting, preparing, and transmitting directives, and serving as a bureaucratic lightning rod. This role, demanding meticulous diligence but denying him independent strategic power, defined him. His colleagues, recognizing his absolute compliance, nicknamed him Lakeitel, a blend of his surname and the German word for lackey. Goering, famously and cruelly, described Keitel as having a sergeant's mind inside a field marshal's body. Keitel himself admitted he was the pupil and not the master in matters concerning the organization and equipment of the Wehrmacht. He lamented that his position required him to tolerate Hitler's tirades against the officer corps, forcing him to control himself, as opposition before low subordinates was unseemly. He repeatedly requested resignation, thrice by some accounts, only to be refused because Hitler valued his diligence and dog-like loyalty, finding Keitel indispensable as the OKW Chief of Staff. Keitel felt himself bound by his oath of loyalty to the Führer. He rationalized that to resign in wartime at a time of misfortune would be a negation of all his principles. Moreover, he genuinely feared that if he left, the next man appointed might be Himmler, allowing the SS to come to power. Keitel's rise coincided precisely with Hitler's most audacious moves toward aggressive war. As early as May 1933, Keitel, then a colonel, was directing clandestine measures to deceive the League of Nations regarding German rearmament, stressing the necessity of secrecy. He emphasized that orally transmitted matters were not provable, they can be denied by us in Geneva. He was clearly a loyal follower of Hitler and believed in National Socialism. His signature soon adorned the preparatory orders for war, starting with the plan against Austria, known as Case Otto, Fall Otto. Keitel admitted that his presence, alongside other generals during the Berchtesgaden Conference with Austrian Chancellor Schuschnigg in February 1938, was purely a military demonstration intended to apply pressure. Following the conference, Keitel continued to apply military pressure against Austria by simulating maneuvers and spreading false rumors. When Schuschnigg announced a plebiscite, Keitel briefed Hitler that night, leading to Hitler issuing the invasion order, which Keitel initialed. Keitel claimed the actual invasion in March 1938 was improvised, with the troops advancing side by side with the Austrian Federal Army, and not a single shot fired. Next came the planning for the destruction of Czechoslovakia, designated Case Green, Fall Grün. On April 21, 1938, Keitel was present when Hitler considered using a fabricated incident, such as the assassination of the German minister in Prague, to preface the attack. Keitel signed multiple directives and memoranda regarding Fall Grün, including the definitive directive of May 30th, which explicitly stated Hitler's unalterable decision to smash Czechoslovakia by military action in the near future. Even after the Munich Agreement, Keitel issued a supplement stressing that the ultimate action against Czechoslovakia should appear to the outside world as merely an act of pacification and not a warlike undertaking. He was also present at the negotiations with Czech President Hacha when the country surrendered. The planning for the invasion of Poland, Fall Weiß, also bore Keitel's signature, including the directive requiring the Wehrmacht to submit its timetable to the OKW by May 1, 1939. He was present on May 23, 1939, when Hitler announced his decision to attack Poland at the earliest suitable opportunity, stating he would ignore the neutrality of Belgium and the Netherlands. Keitel was instrumental in coordinating the invasion of Norway and Denmark, Weser exercise, or Vollweserübung. By a directive dated January 27, 1940, these plans were placed under Keitel's direct and personal guidance, marking the first time the OKW functioned as a working headquarters for unified command across the services. Following the conquest of France, Keitel was the German official who personally read the armistice agreement detailing France's capitulation in the railway car in the Compiègne forest, a moment seen as a potent indicator of his status as Hitler's trusted spokesperson. In July 1940, he was promoted to Field Marshal. During the victory celebrations, Keitel notoriously described Hitler as the greatest warrior of all times. The shadows deepened over the Eastern Front. Keitel testified that he opposed the invasion of the Soviet Union, case Barbarossa, both for purely military reasons, fearing the military was too dispersed and unprepared, and because it violated the Non-Aggression Pact. He drafted a personal memorandum in August 1940 outlining why the attack was not feasible, arguing that German forces lacked the capacity to defeat the Red Army while Great Britain was still in the war. Hitler, reading the document, quickly dismantled Keitel's entire argument. Upset by the strong criticism, Keitel once again submitted his resignation, asking to be replaced by someone with better strategic judgment or to be given command of a combat unit. But Hitler rejected the request. Despite his objections, Keitel initialed Case Barbarossa, which was signed by Hitler on December 18, 1940. Keitel issued an operational supplement on March 13, 1941, which defined the area of operations and established the relationship between military and political officers. He later issued the final timetable for the invasion on June 6, 1941. Keitel also directed all army units to carry out the economic directives issued by Göring, the Green Folder, for the exploitation of Russian territory, food and raw materials. He confirmed Hitler's policy that seizing territories with raw materials took less manpower than making synthetic substitutes. The true depth of Keitel's complicity lies in the numerous criminal orders that bear his signature, which he knowingly executed as Hitler's mouthpiece. He was charged with and convicted of authorizing and participating in war crimes and crimes against humanity, especially concerning the ill treatment of prisoners of war and civilian populations in occupied territories. The war against the Soviet Union was ideological, and Keitel was fully on board with the ruthless measures demanded by the destruction of Bolshevism. On May 13, 1941, weeks before the invasion, Keitel signed the infamous Barbarossa Jurisdiction Order, which provided that Russian civilians suspected of offenses against German troops should be shot or ruthlessly punished without a military trial, and that German soldiers would not face prosecution for offenses against Russian civilians. Though he admitted signing it and personally assuming responsibility, he had also given explanations as to how the document originated. Later, on July 27, 1941, he ordered all copies of this decree destroyed without affecting its validity. Just 4 days earlier, he signed an order concerning the administration of occupied Russia, stating that legal punishments were inadequate and troops should use terrorism to crush the will to resist. Keitel was also the one who issued the horrific Commando Order, Kommissarbefehl. On June 6, 1941, Keitel signed the order that mandated the summary execution of any political commissar of the Red Army taken prisoner. Furthermore, Keitel issued ruthless regulations for the treatment of Soviet prisoners of war, when Admiral Canaris, the head of the Abwehr, protested to Keitel in September 1941, stating that the regulations violated international law. Keitel responded with a damning handwritten note on the memorandum dated September the 23rd. The objections arise from the military concept of chivalrous warfare. This is the destruction of an ideology. Therefore, I approve and back the measures. Keitel later testified that he had in fact agreed with Canaris and argued with Hitler, but had lost the argument. Keitel was centrally responsible for the policy of extreme reprisal against occupied populations. On September the 16th, 1941, he ordered that resistance attacks in the East should be met by putting to death 50 to 100 communists for every German soldier killed, noting that human life was less than nothing in the East. Keitel admitted he signed this order, but pointed out that the terrifying figures of 50 to 100 were Hitler's personal alteration. Keitel's original draft contained figures of 5 to 10. Keitel's signature also appeared on the infamous Night and Fog Decree, Nacht und Nebel, of December 7, 1941. This decree mandated that civilians in occupied Western territories accused of offenses against the German state were to be tried only if the death sentence was guaranteed and could be executed quickly, within a week of arrest. Otherwise, the accused were to be secretly deported to Germany and handed over to the Gestapo or SD with no information given to their families regarding their fate. The intent was to achieve effective and lasting intimidation by keeping the relatives and population uncertain as to the culprit's destiny. Keitel himself believed that to deport individuals secretly was very much more cruel than imposing a death sentence. He claimed that he and his legal department had bitter disputes with Hitler over this order, which Hitler sought to impose because he thought military jurisdiction was too cumbersome. Keitel was relentless in his pursuit of suppressing resistance. An order signed by him on December 16, 1942, concerning the fight against partisans in the Balkans, instructed troops to employ whatever means in this fight without any restraint, also against women and children, as long as it leads to success. While Keitel protested in court that this meant only removing women and children from partisan territories, not murdering them, the prosecution noted that any kind of measures includes murder. He directed that hostages should be taken from nationalist, Democrat, or communist factions and shot after acts of sabotage. Furthermore, when the Reich Commissioner in Norway suggested that holding workmen's relatives responsible for sabotage would only work if executions by firing squad were authorized, Keitel scribbled on the memorandum, "Yes, that is the best." He was also responsible for the forced labor and exploitation of occupied territories. He directed that Russian prisoners of war be used in German war industry, and he signed an order for French, Dutch, and Belgian citizens to work on the construction of the Atlantic Wall. He was present when Hitler directed Sauckel to obtain 4 million new workers from occupied territories. Even against Allied military personnel, Keitel showed the dark side of the destruction of an ideology. On October the 18th, 1942, Hitler issued the Commando Order, which permitted even surrendered commandos, diversionary detachments sent to the German rear, to be shot. Keitel admitted he did not believe the order was right according to his inner convictions, but he no longer opposed it. After the Normandy landings, he reaffirmed the illegal order and extended its application to Allied missions fighting with partisans. Keitel was implicated in the persecution of Jews. Lahosen testified that Keitel told him on September 12, 1939, that the Polish intelligentsia, nobility, and Jews were to be liquidated. Keitel confirmed Hitler's policy that Poland would be used only for labor forces. He signed a secret instruction stating that the fight against Bolshevism demands ruthless and energetic action, especially against Jews, the main instigators of Bolshevism. He maintained that the struggle against Bolshevism necessitated ruthless proceeding against the Jews. though the Wehrmacht was not to use them for service, but they could be placed in labor columns under German supervision. As the Reich crumbled, Keitel remained close to Hitler in the Berlin bunker until the very end. Following Hitler's suicide on April 30, 1945, Keitel joined the short-lived Flensburg government under Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, the new head of state. On May 8, 1945, Keitel, along with other representatives, flew to Berlin to the Soviet headquarters in Karlshorst to sign the formal ratification of the unconditional surrender of the German armed forces representing Dönitz. This was required by the Soviets following the initial signing the previous day in Heim by Alfred Jodl. Keitel, still maintaining his military posture, signed the document that ended over 5 years and 8 months of war in Europe. 5 days later, on May the 13th, Keitel was arrested at the request of the United States and interned. Keitel faced the International Military Tribunal, IMT, in Nuremberg, indicted on all 4 counts: conspiracy to commit crimes against peace, planning and waging wars of aggression, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. In his defense, conducted by Dr. Otto Nelte, Keitel leaned heavily on the argument that he was merely a soldier obeying superior orders in conformity with the Führerprinzip, leader principle, and his personal oath of loyalty. He insisted that military officers were not qualified to judge whether a war was aggressive, viewing that solely as the task of the statesman. He claimed his role was primarily ministerial, that he had no authority of his own, and that all the Keitel orders were, in reality, Führer orders representing Hitler's will. He stated that he had never signed orders without first submitting them to Hitler to ensure they agreed to the letter with the Führer's wishes. However, Keitel was forced to admit that he had knowingly committed war crimes, acknowledging that a large number of orders bearing his name contained deviations from existing international law. He stated that he assumed responsibility for these orders insofar as they were connected with his name and signature. He admitted that he did not believe the Commando Order was legal, but had reaffirmed it anyway. The prosecution, particularly Chief Prosecutor for the USSR Roman Rudenko and Deputy Chief Prosecutor for the UK Sir David Maxwell Fyfe, pressed Keitel relentlessly on the cruelty of the orders he signed. Keitel conceded that the Nacht- und Nebel directives were cruel and brutal. Rudenko highlighted Keitel's written approval of ruthless measures, forcing him to confront his own marginal note on the Canaris report, where he approved measures arising from the necessity of the destruction of an ideology. Keitel attempted to separate the regular Wehrmacht from the crime, declaring that a German soldier never got the idea to kill women and children, a statement contradicted by the ample evidence of mass murders committed under orders bearing his name. In his final statement, Keitel expressed a profound, if limited, sense of guilt. "I believe, but I erred, and I was not in a position to prevent what ought to have been prevented. That is my guilt." He lamented that the best I had to give as a soldier, obedience and loyalty, was exploited for purposes which could not be recognized at the time. The tribunal dismissed his defense entirely. The judgment found him guilty on all 4 counts, stating unequivocally that superior orders, even to a soldier, cannot be considered in mitigation where crimes as shocking and extensive have been committed consciously, ruthlessly, and without military excuse or justification. Sentenced to death by hanging on October 1, 1946, Keitel pleaded with his counsel, Dr. Nelte, to request that his execution be changed to a soldier's death by firing squad. He argued that his guilt stemmed from a sense of duty, a fundamental characteristic of a good soldier. The Allies denied his request, underscoring the criminal rather than military nature of his acts. In the early morning of October 16, 1946, Wilhelm Keitel faced the hangman's noose at Nuremberg prison. He entered the execution chamber, the second man to be executed that day, and walked to the gallows with his head held high, displaying a semblance of the proud Prussian officer. His final words echoed his lifelong adherence to the fatherland. Even in the face of judgment, I call on God Almighty to have mercy on the German people. More than 2 million German soldiers went to their death for the fatherland before me. I follow now my sons, all for Germany. The execution was horrifically botched. The executioner, U.S. Army Sergeant John C. Woods, lacked experience and had poorly measured the rope. The trapdoor itself was too small. As Keitel plunged, he struck his head on the trapdoor, failing to snap his neck. His death struggle, a slow strangulation, lasted 24 agonizing minutes. Keitel's memoirs, written hurriedly in his cell in the 6 weeks before he was hanged, stand as a final testament to his life, a life tragically defined by obedience, a soldier who was, in his heart, Hitler's loyal shield-bearer. His remains, like those of the other executed men, were cremated and the ashes scattered in the river Isar. The story of Wilhelm Keitel remains a haunting chapter, underscoring the depth of human compliance and the terrifying consequences when duty is blind to conscience and honor. His career serves as a stark reminder that even a field marshal, standing in the boots of Germany's great historical commanders, could not escape accountability for criminal deeds merely by claiming to be the pupil and not the master.